Hello, and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here with my April reading wrap-up. So in April I read 15 books, or more precisely 13 books and 2 novellas, which was a really good reading month for me. Ironically, it wasn't really well distributed throughout the month. I read a ton at the beginning and a ton at the end, and I kind of had a week or two slump in the middle there, but it all worked out well, and I'm very happy to have read 15 books in the month of April. So without further ado, I will get into the books I read, and I will be discussing them in the order I read them rather than in order of preference or anything like that. So the first book I finished in April was Ken Foley's The Evening and the Morning. This is the prequel that recently came out for the Pillars of the Earth trilogy. This book is set in the UK, right at the tail end of the Viking era. But I was kind of disappointed there wasn't as much Viking content as I thought there would be based off of the descriptions I had read. This book sets up the story of Kingsbridge, which is the town that features in the other 3 books in the trilogy there. So we learn the backstory about how Kingsbridge came to be and the different characters that were influential in setting up this town. Overall, this was a 3-star read for me. As much as I was happy to learn more about the history of a town that I came to love through the other books in the series, I did feel like the characters and plots were a bit stale and rehashed from other books in the trilogy. A lot of the tropes and character personalities and whatnot were really recycled from previous books of his that I've read. I am hoping to do a full Pillars of the Earth trilogy and prequel review, though, in the future with my full thoughts on this series. The second book I finished in April is The Far Traveler, Voyages of a Viking Woman by Nancy Marie Brown. This is an absolutely incredible work of nonfiction, and I'm sure that it will end up on my top 5 list for 2021. I just loved it so much. And this book tells the story of Gudrid, who is a Viking woman who featured in some of the Viking sagas, but dives into the more recent archaeological evidence that is proving what has been passed down for generations in these stories. This book details the daily life of Viking women, the value placed on fiber arts like weaving and spinning, the settlements in North America that made up Vineland, the DNA connections between the Vikings and the Celts, exploration patterns across the North Atlantic, and the tensions between Norse paganism and Christianity during the late Viking Age. So if you're at all interested in Viking history, early medieval history, fascinating women's stories, or the intersections of archaeology and oral history, I can't recommend this book or this author enough. She has a new book coming out called The Real Valkyrie, which is coming out at the end of the summer, and it's about archaeological evidence of Viking warrior women, and I have that actually as an e-arc from NetGalley, so I'm looking forward to doing a deep dive into Nancy Marie Brown's work in a future video. Then the third book I read in April is Gunnar's Daughter by Sigrid Undset. This is a shorter work than her Christian Lavransdatter trilogy, but I definitely did still enjoy it. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you'll know that I was a little apprehensive about this because it is an older translation. This book came out in the 1920s or 1930s, and because it's one of her less popular works, the translation hasn't been updated since then. So it's about a 100-year-old translation, whereas the Christian Lavransdatter book have a translation that's come out in the past 20 years or so. Nevertheless, I was thrilled that this book did live up to my expectations. It's a beautiful and heartbreaking story following the life of Vigdis, and we see the impacts of sexual violence, family relationships, revenge, societal expectations on her life in this time period. Just like Christian Lavransdatter, this book really does explore the human condition in such an interesting way, while also accompanied by some wonderfully profound passages of writing that manage to sweep you up and feel like you are right there in the snowy mountains of Norway as well. So ultimately, I gave Gunnar's Daughter 4 stars. It's not quite as memorable for me as Christian Lavransdatter, but still well worth the read if you enjoy Sigrid Undset's work. Then the 4th book I read in April is When He Was Wicked by Julia Quinn. This is the 6th book in the Bridgerton series, and we are following Francesca after she is tragically widowed after just a few years of marriage. Her husband's best friend and cousin inherits his title, and they begin to both have feelings for each other, but really struggle with whether that is betraying the memory of her deceased husband. This is definitely my favorite book so far in the series, and I found the storyline both very sweet and emotionally moving. So I gave this one 4 stars, and I think it'll probably end up being the highlight for me of the series. Then, as usual, I read the second epilogue for this book, which is one of the 2 novellas I read this month, which are always an interesting little addition to the story. Then the 5th book I read in April is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I'm obsessed with the way she writes from a shifting kaleidoscope of perspectives and time periods, starting with a discordant jumble of puzzle pieces that slowly slot together until by the end of the book you have the full picture of the story. I went into this thinking it was a prequel to Station 11 because I recognized some of the character names, and found out that it is not quite a prequel, but also so much more than just a prequel. It is set in a parallel universe to the world of Station 11, or rather, more our universe, one in which the Georgian flu did not wipe out the majority of the Earth's population. And it was fascinating to see throughout the novel how the characters thought about alternate universes, or what they were calling counter lives, always imagining that these would be so much better than the reality they were living through, when, having read Station 11, we know that the alternate universe for their lives is actually so much worse than they could even ever have imagined. Like with Station 11, I listened to The Glass Hotel on audiobook and was swept away by Emily St. John Mandel's writings. Her descriptive passages and the way she brings you into the minds of characters is some of the best modern writing I have ever read. I gave The Glass Hotel 5 stars, and I'm pretty sure it will end up on my yearly favorites as well. Then the 6th book I read in April is The Red Bones by Anne Cleeves. This is the 3rd book in the Shetland Mystery series, and it was another 4-star mystery for me, which means this series is just being consistently 4-star reads, and I'm really enjoying the atmosphere of the Shetland Islands for a mystery series setting. The mystery in this book centers around an archaeological dig that is working to uncover a late medieval era merchant's house in an old woman's backyard. When she is shot the night after a skeleton is uncovered by the researchers, our detective Jimmy Perez has to step in and try to figure out what secrets are hiding on this land. Having just read The Far Traveler, which also was focusing on Nancy Marie Brown's experience at an archaeological dig in Iceland uncovering the home of Gudrid, I feel like Red Bones came along at an excellent time for me, and I definitely enjoyed the reading experience, and I'm looking forward to continuing on with the series. Then the 7th book I read in April is Victorian Villains, Prisoners from Newcastle Jail, 1871 to 1873 by Barry Redfern. I have actually filmed a whole separate book review for this, so I won't go into too much detail here. I did really enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. I think if you enjoyed The Five, or Oliver Twist, or have any interest in Victorian penal policy, or the lives of people who had interactions with the criminal justice system during the Victorian era, you would really enjoy this book. It's quite short, and it doesn't go too in-depth into each person's story, but it still manages to cover a lot of ground and introduce a lot of topics about the prison system and the criminal justice system in this time period in Newcastle. Then the 8th book that I read was a short poetry collection called Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Warsan Shire. The poet is a Somali woman who spent a significant amount of her childhood in a refugee camp in Kenya and now lives in the UK. And the poems are really reflecting on her childhood and how it was affected by conflict, sexism, clashes between religion and culture. I found a lot of the poems to be hauntingly beautiful, and I gave this collection 5 stars. If you're looking to read more poetry collections, and you're interested in works coming out of the Horn of Africa, I would highly recommend Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth. Then the 9th book that I read was The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. I really enjoyed this play. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm glad that I have finally got around to reading it, as it's been one of his plays that I have been wanting to read for a long, long time. I feel like this play had the perfect blend of comedic moments, as well as more serious topics that still have relevancy in today's world. Then the 10th book that I read in April is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, and this one will definitely also be in the running for a favorite this year. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm so glad that I finally got to it this April. The writing in this book was absolutely beautiful, a mixture of whimsy and humor, with evocative nature writing and heartwarming personal growth and exploration. It was a real treat journeying through the month with these 4 women as they learned more about themselves and their relationships. Every time I picked up this book, I felt like I was swept away to this castle as well, walking with them through the gardens full of beautiful flowers, enjoying the ocean view. It is definitely a new favorite and one that I could see picking up frequently in springs to come. Then the 11th book that I read was Out to Canaan by Jan Karon, and this is the 4th book in the Mitford series. I discussed my thoughts on this book in our monthly wrap-up video over on Kate Howe's channel, so I'll link that down below if you're interested in seeing my thoughts and the full discussion on that book with the other co-hosts of #AYearInMitford. Overall, this is one of my favorites in the series so far, and I feel like we're getting so much rich character growth that's only possible in a multi-book series, where the character arcs aren't forced within one book but can unfold over many, many pages. Then the 12th book that I read in April is It's in His Kiss by Julia Quinn. This is the 7th book in the Bridgerton series, and it is Hyacinth's story, and I really did not enjoy this one. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I think it's probably going to end up being my least favorite in the Bridgerton series. We follow Hyacinth as she gets involved with Lady Danbury's nephew in helping to translate his grandmother's diary from Italian, and uncovers a story of some hidden jewels in his family home. I felt like the plot was somewhat recycled from the first book in the series with just as many problematic elements. The jewel storyline was unrealistic and irritating, and I did not enjoy the dynamic between the two of them at all. So this one and then the second epilogue that I read are definitely not my favorites from this series. And then lastly, the 13th book that I read in April was a quick little audiobook that I snuck in on my best friend's recommendation, and that is Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. And this book centers around 16-year-old Melody, and the main event in the story is her coming-of-age party in 2001 at her grandparents' house. And we bounce forward and backward in time from that main event. We go backwards and learn more about her parents' and grandparents' past, and we jump forward in time as well to see the impact of various events in the near future on this family unit. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, but I do feel like there are elements that I didn't fully comprehend listening to the audiobook. And I think maybe it would have been one that I would have got more out of if I'd read the physical copy. But I would definitely recommend this book if you're looking for a shorter audiobook that still deals seriously with some important topics. So those are all the books that I read in April. I hope you enjoyed my reading wrap-up. I would love to know what your favorite book you read in April was. You can leave that in a comment down below. Until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.